Welcome back to Fossil Ridge Games. Today we are going to be talking about Colossus for Marvel Champions Living card game. This is going to be a basic how to play video for the hero and some basic deck building strategies. Let's go ahead and get into the stats. First off, this character has a recovery of 4 while in alter ego form. In addition to that, 14 hit points. And for a setup, what you can do is go into your deck for a copy of Organic Steel. There are going to be 2 copies of this card in your deck. This is an upgrade. And you place 2 counters basically on this card. And after a tough status card is discarded from Colossus, you can exhaust this card to remove a steel counter to basically give that tough status card right back to the character. So first off, the name of the game with a high recovery and 14 hit points and tough status cards is going to make this character really pretty much a tanky style of character that can absorb a ton of damage. In addition to that, I'll go ahead and flip over. When you do change form, you get to put a tough status card actually onto Colossus. In addition to that, you can have 2 tough status cards on Colossus at the same time, so he can carry an additional one. So some of the synergies that came into being when we brought this deck onto the table and the person put their deck together is really kind of focusing on a lot of the stuff that you can do to make this person tanky. So in addition to kind of what you're seeing on the table, obviously this card right here, so Unshakable, and this only works on a character that has a basic hit point value of 14. It can't be adjusted, so at this point it does. This is going to allow the character to be steady, which means that they require 2 status cards to be stunned or confused, which is absolutely fantastic. So think of it this way: you can have 2 tough status cards, you can have 2 confused and stun cards on this character as well. So I think that was pretty fun. In addition to that, using recuperation is going to make it so you can heal even faster. So it's going to be an action, you heal damage from your alter ego equal to your recovery. So that's going to be 4. Now remember, you can always buff that with downtime. Just as a heads up, and this is kind of my thing when I play this character, when you turn into your alter ego form, it allows you to take any card from your discard pile and put it into your draw deck and shuffle it in. So kind of for me, what I wanted to do is just keep the tough status cards to keep coming out over and over again. So I preferred putting Organic Steel into my draw deck when I flipped over to the alter ego form. And obviously you can put whatever you want in there because the game is obviously highly situational, but that's just a quick recommendation. In addition to that, don't forget to put 1 tough status card on Colossus every time you turn into the hero form as well. And then Organic Steel, use this to consistently build up tough status cards. Now, where this character gets to be a little bit fun is that not all of your tough status cards are used to soak up damage. So you can actually spend them to amplify some of your other skills. So kind of what we'll do is just go through that real quick. So here's the first one. This one's called Steel Fist. So you can deal 5 damage to an enemy. That's great. But you can discard a tough status card from your hero to stun and confuse that enemy. So think of it this way: you can play this down, you can burn one of your tough status cards, and now you're going to stun and confuse the enemy. So that's a lot of fun. You know, in addition to that, you also have this card that's called Made of Rage, and there's going to be a couple copies of this in the deck as well. So when you make a basic attack, you discard a tough status card, so one of these again, from your hero to get a +6 attack, and then it also gains Overkill. So that's a pretty massive hit that you can make, and once again, this is going to be damage dealing as well. So the previous card that we saw was also a damage dealing card. So what's kind of fun about this, you don't have to just blow through these tough status cards to soak up damage. You can actually use them to amplify your attack as well. So I think that's kind of a fun mechanic for this character. Another great card in this deck, and there's 2 copies of this, it's called Armor Up, which appears in the Colossus deck, is to get Colossus sort of back into the game faster. You're only allowed to change form typically once during your sort of hero action portion of the game turn. So in this case, let's say, Colossus is heavily wounded, maybe, only has 3 hit points left or something like that. And then when you flip over, you've already changed form once for that round, and obviously you want to perform a recovery action to get some of those hit points back. But that's going to leave you kind of at the end of the turn still trapped in your alter ego form, and that's hard for you to get back into the game. But what you can do as an alter ego interrupt, this says when the villain activates, change to hero form. So you can wait really to the beginning of the villain sort of phase, and then what's going to happen is that you can flip over, and then when you do that, it's going to trigger a tough status card to be placed onto your character at the same time. So think of it as Colossus is somebody that can jump back in very quickly and get back into the fight. So keep that in mind when you're playing Colossus. You're not going to be spending a large amount of time in your alter ego form, but if you are, you can use the studio card. This is going to be a support card to kind of help you jump back into the mix a little bit better. So a couple of the things that I recommend while you do this, and this just simply says exhaust Peter's studio, discard cards from your deck until you discard a Colossus card and add that card to your hand. So when you start cycling through, you're not going to have really the opportunity to choose what you get, but a couple of the cards that I liked getting with this is going to be Organic Steel, and we already talked about that, in addition to that Armor Up, which is another card that we just talked about. So these happen a fair amount of the time when you're sort of cycling through your deck, which isn't a bad thing, and it kind of helps you get back into the game and get back into the fight a little bit faster. Let's get into a couple of the upgrades that exist in the deck. All heroes have at least, anywhere from 1 to 3 or even more upgrade cards that really supercharge them over the course of the game. First one's going to be Titanium Muscles, and this is going to give Colossus a +1 attack, but this is also going to be a resource ramping card, so you can exhaust this card and generate a physical resource for each tough status card on Colossus. So you can have anywhere from 0, 1, or 2 toughness cards on Colossus. So what's great about this is that it doesn't actually burn the tough status cards when you use it. So if they're just sitting out on him, you can use that for a physical resource. So just kind of remember that it doesn't burn them. Next up is Iron Will, and this is going to increase his thwart by 1 point. Now he has a pretty low thwart value; it's only a 1. So this isn't going to give him an appreciable amount of thwarting. In addition to this as well, there's really no thwarting cards in the hero portion of this deck. He does a lot of damage, and he has toughness cards to soak up damage, but he doesn't really have a lot of threat mitigation. So this is going to give you a +1 on that. And then this also says after a tough stats card is discarded from Colossus, it allows you to draw a card. So this is going to be a card drawing mechanic, and it's going to key off of you basically spending or discarding your tough status cards from him, which is pretty cool. This next card is a little bit strange, and I didn't feel like it really impacted the game all that much, and that's Bulletproof Protector. This is just 0 cost event, and it's a hero action. So as an example, if Colossus has 1 tough status card on him at the time, what you can do is you can play down Bulletproof Protector, and you discard a tough status card. And the first option on this is that you can give your hero 2 tough status cards. So think of it as you're basically giving Colossus an extra tough status card. Now what's weird about this is that it's situational. You can't even do this effect unless you have a tough status card. So we found that a little bit clunky when we were playing, and sometimes the other players tried to do this to gain tough status cards, and they didn't realize that you have to have one to get 2 of the tough status cards. And then the bottom bullet point on this is that you can ready your hero, which is okay. You can, he doesn't have a massive attack or a massive thwart or anything like that. So it wasn't really highly impactful. There's going to be 2 copies of Bulletproof Protector in this. And then finally, we're just going to go over the last thing, which is the ally that appears. It's going to be Shadowcat. Now, when we were playing, obviously, Shadowcat was one of the heroes that we were playing with, so it wasn't like we could even have this card out. It's a pretty decent card, but once again, it's like situational. Shadowcat ignores the guard and patrol keywords and crisis icons in play, so it's kind of situational. It's an okay ally, but if you're playing with Shadowcat anyway, you can't bring it out. When the Mutant Genesis expansion came out, it shipped with 2 additional heroes. So our game group, we typically play Marvel Champions with 4 players. So when it shipped, we sat down at the table and I divvied up the heroes amongst the table, and then each person got to create whatever sort of deck that they wanted. What was kind of comical is that the Colossus character decided to pick Justice. So there's really no threat mitigation cards in the Colossus deck. In addition to that, the thwart value is only a 1. So I was kind of interested to see what the player was going to come up with. And what they decided is to sort of do a blended deck that kind of does everything. And I thought it was super strange. And when they were putting it together, I was kind of wondering if it'd work or not, but it actually worked out quite nicely. So what they decided to do is use sort of a shield agent support style for Colossus, and there's these decks are all over the internet if you want to go out and look for it. But the government liaisons, and you put 3 copies in your deck, and these are used and you exhaust it to reduce the resource cost of a future shield card that you're playing by 1. So you're not really generating resources, but you're kind of decreasing the amount that you're going to have to spend on those cards. So obviously you want to play stuff like, Hellcarrier, that's a shield card. And then you can be sort of like shield centric, and there's like a host of like shield allies that you can play as well. And so you can be putting these into play at reduced cost because of your government liaisons, which is great. And then something else that you can play is the Sky Destroyer. And this is something that you can play a shield card, and you can exhaust this and hit for 2 points of damage, which is great. Then another sort of classic combo that's built into the game is Monica Chang. She allows you to go through your deck and put surveillance teams sort of into play. And notice that these are going to be at reduced cost because of your government liaisons. Then in addition to that, once you have sort of this shield presence on the table, you can start using Homeland Intervention. And you can exhaust up to 3 different shield cards. So that can be 1, 2, or 3. And then for each one of those that you are exhausting, you can remove 2 threat from a scheme. So you can go anywhere from 2 to 6 threat mitigation by casting this card, and it's a 0 to bring out into play. So what's kind of fun about this is that you can build up that shield presence on the table, and then the person also went with Beat Cop, and this card is ridiculous in my opinion. It's a really fantastic card. It's a little bit on the pricey side, but once you get these out, you just have a pretty decent amount of threat mitigation every turn, and then you have a special ability that you can wipe out minions if you want to, because you can deal damage to them as well. So kind of where the sweet spot for this deck was is that you have a decent amount of damage generation with Colossus because of the hero cards in the deck. So he can punch pretty hard and he can fight pretty hard. He's going to be spending some of his toughness cards for that, which is totally fine. In addition to that, he's highly, highly tanky. You got a high amount of hit points. You have all those tough stats cards and all the other stuff that we talked about that makes this character a really tanky style character. And then in addition to that, if you mix these Justice cards in, it's kind of like non-invasive to Colossus, so Colossus can kind of do his thing with fighting, and then you have all this support, all of these support cards on the side that are doing threat mitigation. So if you're kind of looking for sort of a middle-of-the-road deck, I thought this deck worked pretty well. It didn't really excel at anything, but it was very versatile, and especially in a multiplayer game, I felt that it worked really well because Colossus could play any role. He could do some damage dealing, he could do some tanking to protect some of the weaker characters, and then in addition you had, basic threat mitigation, which was a lot of fun to play. So if you're looking for something kind of different, maybe try out a deck such as this. So to sum it up, I would recommend playing Colossus. I think in general, it's a fairly easy character to play. Obviously a high level of survivability, so I think it's a good hero for a newer player to get into the game. So if you have somebody that really likes X-Men and they want to sort of learn about Marvel Champions, this is a great place to start because you're not going to get wiped off the board really fast, and you can play a bunch of games and really last a healthy portion of that game without having to worry about the villain, just completely kicking your butt or anything of that nature. So this is a great character for a newer player or even an intermediate player to play. Obviously, I've played a gazillion games of this. I really liked playing it as well. Having multiple tough stats cards is just fantastic. I really enjoy that quite a bit. So I did feel like Colossus it felt definitely different when I was playing Colossus, so it felt sort of fresh and new. So thanks to the game designers for that. In addition, and I highly recommend this as well, is have fun with deck building and just try different stuff. And part of Mutant Genesis is, and I mentioned this before, we all try just different weird deck ideas, and this keeps the game fresh as well. If you always use the same cards over and over again, you might get kind of bored with the game. So to sort of keep things fresh, we mixed it up quite a bit and tried to jumble it up and not even really use the pre-made decks for each of the characters. Obviously we looked at the deck designs, but really just focused on kind of having fun and switching things up and keeping it fresh. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have fun gaming.